Stop for a second and notice that voice babbling away inside your skull right now. That weird running commentary that never shuts up, judging every single thing, even these very words you're reading. Here's a wild question. Who the hell is doing all that talking up there? It's pretty hilarious when you think about it. Most people spend their whole lives trapped inside this mental radio station without ever asking where the broadcast is coming from. We just assume, oh, that's me thinking, and move on with our day. But hold on, is it really you? Are you actually creating these thoughts? Or are they just popping up in your mind like bubbles rising in champagne? And if that voice is truly you, then who's the one listening to it? Who's aware of all this mental noise? Isn't that awareness also you? Mind-bending puzzle, the speaker and listener somehow existing in the same head, reveals something absolutely wild about consciousness itself. Today, we're diving deep into this mystery together. Not as some boring academic exercise, but as a genuine invitation to discover something life-changing about your own existence. Something that could completely transform how you experience every single moment. Let's jump in with something happening to you right now. As you're taking in these words, there's a voice in your head following along, right? Maybe it's repeating what I'm saying, maybe it's arguing with it, thinking, yeah, I guess so, or not sure about that, or even where is this guy going with this nonsense? Now here's where it gets weird. If you really pay attention to this voice, you'll notice something bizarre. You can't predict with total certainty what this voice is going to say next. If you could, why would it even bother speaking? It would be like reading a book where you already know every word on every page. Totally pointless. Yet we feel absolutely certain that this voice is me. I'm thinking, we say with complete confidence. But am I doing the thinking, or is thinking just happening to me? We make this crazy assumption that because thoughts occur inside your head, they must belong to you, like you're some kind of thought factory cranking them out. But when you actually search for this thinker, the one supposedly creating each thought, you end up in a really strange place. Try it yourself right now. Try to think your next thought before it arrives. What will it be? You have no clue, do you? Not until it shows up. By the time you know what your next thought will be, boom, it's already happened. So who exactly is running this show? Maybe the brain is thinking the same way the heart is pumping or the lungs are breathing. But we don't go around saying I'm pumping my heart or I'm inflating my lungs, do we? Unless we're deliberately controlling our breath, we recognize these are automatic processes happening within us. What if thinking works exactly the same way? What if thoughts bubble up in consciousness like waves rising from the ocean, not separate from it but part of the whole dance? This inner voice isn't something you're creating so much as something you're watching unfold. And this voice has been shaped by absolutely everything you've experienced. Your parents, your teachers, books, conversations, the whole culture you grew up in. So when the voice talks about me, myself, and I, what is it really pointing to? Is it pointing to the real you? Or just to some character it's been rehearsing your entire life? Pretty fascinating when you sit with it, right? This brings us to what might be the most epic illusion of human existence, the way we've confused this inner narrator with our actual self. From the moment we learn to speak, we're taught this strange game. They give us a name and say you're John or you're Sarah, as if this wild collection of sensations, feelings, and experiences could be squeezed into a single word. Gradually over the years, we build up this elaborate story. I was born on this date to these people in this town, went to this school, have these strengths and weaknesses. I'm this type of person. The voice becomes the narrator of this personal movie, constantly updating our biography, endlessly telling us who we are. I'm someone who loves jazz but hates country music. I'm terrible at math. I'm insecure about how I look. On and on it goes, weaving this fictional character that we mistake for ourselves. But this is identity theft of the highest order. It's like going to a movie and getting so absorbed in the plot that you forget you're watching actors on a screen. You temporarily believe Hamlet and Juliet are real people. But in this case, the movie has been running so long, literally your whole life, that you've completely forgotten it's just a performance. This separate self, this ego as Westerners call it, or what Buddhists call the grand illusion, isn't actually a thing at all. It's a process. something your body-mind is doing, not something it is. Think about when you say, I think or I feel. What exactly is this I that thinks and feels? Try to point to it. Your body? But your body is constantly changing, practically every cell replaced, every 7 years or so. Your memories? But these shift too. Some fade, some get exaggerated, some are totally made up without you realizing it. What stays the same? Only this sense of I, this gravitational center that the voice keeps referring to. But when you look directly for it, it's like trying to grab your own shadow. The closer you get, the more it slips away. Yet how desperately we cling to it. How terrified we are of losing this sense of self. We call it ego death and treat it like a disease. But if clinging to this illusion is the real problem. The separate self is useful as a social agreement, kind of like money. We all pretend it exists because it makes certain interactions work smoothly. But trouble starts when we confuse the agreement with reality, when we start believing this I, this inner voice, is our true being. It's like your reflection in a mirror, handy for fixing your hair, but you wouldn't try to feed it breakfast, would you? Yet that's basically what we do with this conceptual self. We spend our lives trying to satisfy its endless cravings, live up to its impossible standards, defend it against imagined insults. What would happen if we stopped mistaking the voice for who we really are? If we saw it as just one function of consciousness among many? Maybe something far more interesting than our familiar inner chatter would reveal itself. Here's a trippy paradox. When you try to watch the voice in your head, to observe your thoughts as they appear, who's doing the watching? There seems to be an observer standing apart from the thoughts, right? But if you examine this observer closely, something extraordinary happens. It too becomes something observed. It's like trying to bite your own teeth or see your own eyes without a mirror. The philosopher Wittgenstein said it perfectly. The eye that sees is not itself in what it sees. You see everything except the seeing itself. And yet the seeing is happening, isn't it? The Hindus have this beautiful term for it, the witness, this witnessing presence that's aware of everything, including your thoughts, but can never itself become an object of awareness. It's always the subject, never the object. Now here's where things get really wild. In the West, we've been taught that consciousness is something the brain produces, like the liver produces bile, just a side effect of neurons firing. But this explanation, it's always seemed backwards to me. It's like saying a TV creates the shows you watch. No, the TV receives signals and translates them into images and sound. What if the brain is more like a receiver than a creator? What if consciousness isn't something the brain makes, but something it tunes into? The ancient Indian philosophers maintain that consciousness isn't a product, but the fundamental ground of existence. They call it the ultimate reality when referring to its expression in individuals. It's not something you have, but what you are at the deepest level. Consider this. When you're totally absorbed in a gorgeous sunset, or making love, or listening to music, those moments when the chattering voice goes silent, does your consciousness disappear? Hell no. Actually, it becomes more vivid, more immediate, more real. The commentary stops, but the awareness remains, doesn't it? This suggests something revolutionary, that the true nature of consciousness might not be the inner voice at all, but the aware space in which the voice appears, not the thoughts, but the knowing of the thoughts. But here's another delicious paradox. As soon as you try to grab this pure awareness, to hold it and study it, it vanishes. The very act of trying to observe it turns it into an object, which it can never be. It's like trying to illuminate darkness with a flashlight. The moment you shine the light, darkness disappears. You can never catch it. Yet darkness exists, doesn't it? Is why the philosophical problem of proving other minds exist has always amused me. The real puzzle is that you can't even prove your own mind exists, at least not as something to study. So when we ask who's speaking in my head, we're falling into a trap. We're assuming consciousness is a thing, a noun, when maybe it's better understood as a process, a verb, not a thinker who thinks but thinking itself, not a seer who sees but seeing itself, not a hearer who hears but hearing itself. The greatest joke is that what you truly are isn't a separate entity trying to understand consciousness, but consciousness itself pretending to be a separate entity. Now notice something remarkable about this voice. It speaks in a language, English or Spanish or Mandarin, whatever you learned as a kid. And language is inherently social, a communication system between people. This reveals something profound. A voice in your head, this supposedly private thing, is actually social in its very structure. You're talking to yourself exactly the way others once talked to you. When a kid learns to tie shoes, the parent says, first take this lace over that one, then pull it under and through the loop. Later, the child repeats these same instructions to themselves while learning. Over, under, through. Eventually, they don't need the verbal instructions, but that inner dialogue was essential. The Russian psychologist Vygotsky called this inner speech and recognized it begins as outer speech, actual conversations with others that we gradually absorb. Your inner voice is a chorus of all the voices you've ever heard, all the instructions given to you, all the judgments passed on you. Ever notice your inner critic often sounds suspiciously like a parent or teacher from childhood? That's not coincidence. It literally is their voice absorbed into your mind. And it's not just individual voices we absorb, but entire cultural thinking patterns. If you grew up in a Western society, your inner voice is likely analytical, categorizing, dividing the world into subjects and objects. If you grew up in traditional East Asian culture, it might be more relational, more attuned to context and connection. The ancient Greeks had no concept of conscience as we understand it today, that inner voice telling you right from wrong. Instead, he believed the gods spoke directly to them. A Greek warrior might say, Athena whispered in my ear to spare this man. Today we'd say, my conscience told me to spare him. Same phenomenon, totally different interpretation. What fascinates me is we've internalized not just specific voices, but an entire model of what it means to be a self. In the West, this model is heavily influenced by Christianity, with its emphasis on the individual soul, and by Descartes with his famous, I think, therefore I am. We've been taught to identify with our thoughts, to believe thinking is the core of our being. But this is cultural bias, not universal truth. In many Eastern traditions, the true self is found in the silence beneath thought, in the space between words. As the Zen saying goes, the mind is like a monkey jumping from branch to branch. The goal isn't to identify with the monkey, but to watch its antics with detached amusement. There's something tremendously freeing in recognizing the social origins of our inner voice. Once you see that your thoughts aren't entirely your own, that they're a collection of internalized conversations, cultural assumptions, and learned responses, you can start holding them more lightly. You can begin asking, is this thought really mine? Does it serve me? Is it even true? You can discriminate between useful aspects of your conditioning and harmful ones. Most importantly, you can see you're not obligated to believe everything you think. Just because a thought appears doesn't mean it's true or important or worthy of attention. It may simply be an old recording playing one more time. This is what Buddhists mean by non-attachment to thoughts, not suppressing or fighting them, but recognizing their constructed nature and therefore not being tyrannized by them. It's like watching clouds pass across the sky. You don't try to stop the clouds or chase them, you simply observe their passing, knowing they aren't the sky itself. Your thoughts, too, are merely passing clouds in the vast sky of your awareness. Eastern approaches to this puzzle of consciousness fascinate me, particularly Zen Buddhism and Taoism. They offer such a refreshingly different perspective from Western thinking habits. In Zen, there's this wonderful concept called no mind. It doesn't mean absence of consciousness, but rather consciousness without the cluttering activity of the ego mind. It's the state a master archer enters when releasing the arrow, or a painter when the brush seems to move by itself. There's a famous Zen story about a centipede asked how he coordinated all his 100 legs. The moment he started thinking about it, he became paralyzed and couldn't walk. Perfect metaphor for what happens when the analyzing mind interferes with consciousness's natural functioning. Zen masters developed a practice called sitting meditation. But unlike Western meditation that often involves concentrating on an object or idea, this is about sitting with no goal, no intention, no attempt to control the mind. Just sitting, just being. When a thought arises, you neither follow it nor suppress it. You simply acknowledge its presence and let it pass, like watching a boat appear on the horizon then sail away without feeling any need to jump aboard. What Zen practitioners discovered through this seemingly simple practice was profound. When you stop identifying with the voice in your head, when you cease believing you are your thoughts, something extraordinary happens. The boundaries between self and other, between subject and object, begin dissolving. This is what they call awakening, the direct experiential realization that your true nature isn't the separate self constructed by thought, but something far vaster and more interconnected. Taoists approach this from a slightly different angle. They speak of the way which cannot be spoken or conceptualized. As Laozi famously said, the way that can be told is not the eternal way. The moment you try capturing it in words or concepts, you've already lost it. For Taoists, the chattering mind, what they call monkey mind, isn't your enemy to be conquered, but simply a natural function that's been allowed to dominate inappropriately, like a servant who's forgotten his place and now acts like master of the house. The goal isn't silencing the servant, but restoring proper order, remembering who's truly in charge. The true master in the Taoist view isn't another voice, not a super-ego or higher self, but the silent awareness that precedes all voices. The Tao Te Ching says, "He who knows does not speak, he who speaks does not know." This isn't anti-intellectual, but a recognition that genuine understanding transcends conceptual thought. It's the difference between reading a menu and tasting food, between reading about swimming and diving into water. What I find most valuable in both traditions is their emphasis on direct experience rather than belief or theory. They offer practices, not doctrines. They don't ask you to believe anything, but rather to look for yourself, to examine your own consciousness with patient attention and see what's really there. What they both point to in different ways is that the voice in your head isn't your deepest identity. It's a surface phenomenon like waves on the ocean, useful certainly, but no more you than your heartbeat or digestion. The true you, if we can even use such a term, is the awareness in which all phenomena, including thoughts, appear. It's the knowing, not the known, the seeing, not the seen. This brings us to perhaps the most radical implication of Eastern thought, that this deepest level of awareness might not be personal at all, that your consciousness and mine, be like two waves on the same ocean, apparently separate from a limited perspective, but in reality, manifestations of a single underlying reality. As the ancient texts put it, you are that. Your true nature isn't separate from ultimate reality itself. Now let's be crystal clear about something. I'm not suggesting thinking is bad or we should stop the voice in our head. That would be like saying digestion is bad and we should stop our stomachs from working. The problem isn't thinking itself, but our relationship to thinking. Thinking is a marvelous tool. It allows us to plan, remember, create, solve problems. Without conceptual thought, we couldn't build bridges or compose symphonies or develop vaccines. We couldn't even have this conversation. But in the West, we've developed a peculiar relationship with this tool. We've come to worship it, to identify with it completely, to believe it's the core of our being. It's as if we've decided the most important thing about a carpenter is his hammer. This over-identification with thought has led to a kind of tyranny. For many of us, the voice never stops, chattering away constantly, commenting, judging, reminiscing, worrying, planning. We think this is normal, even necessary. But is it? Is this constant internal monologue really essential to functioning, or might it actually block our deepest well-being? Consider when you're most happy, most fulfilled, most vibrantly alive. Is it when you're lost in thought, when the voice is chattering 19 to the dozen? Or when you're completely absorbed in something, in nature, in art, in sport, in love, when the voice momentarily falls silent and you're simply present to what is? Most people, if honest, will admit it's the latter. Moments of pure presence, of absorption, are when we feel most alive, most real. The psychologist Csikszentmihalyi calls this state flow, and his research shows ITs consistently associated with the deepest forms of human satisfaction. But here's the catch. You can't think your way to flow. In fact, excessive thinking is the primary barrier to entering this state. The moment you start thinking about being in flow, you're no longer in it. This points to something profound. There's a mode of consciousness available to us that doesn't depend on the voice in our head, a way of knowing that doesn't rely on words or concepts, a form of intelligence that's direct, intuitive, non-symbolic. The pianist doesn't need to name each note as he plays. The dancer doesn't need to verbally instruct her limbs. The master chef doesn't consult an internal recipe book for every pinch of salt. There's a knowing in the doing that transcends thought. This is embodied intelligence, as opposed to conceptual intelligence. And it's available to all of us all the time if we'd only stop drowning it out with incessant internal chatter. So how do we break the tyranny of constant thinking? How do we restore thought to its proper role as tool rather than master? We certainly don't do it by fighting against thought, by trying to forcibly silence the voice. That's just more thinking. Like trying to smooth ripples on a pond by slapping at them with your hand. You only create more ripples. No, the way to quiet the mind is through awareness, by becoming conscious of your thinking as it happens, by watching the voice rather than being wholly identified with it. When you watch your thoughts without judgment, without trying to change them, something remarkable happens. They begin losing their compulsive quality. They start slowing down on their own. Gaps begin appearing in the previously solid stream of mental chatter. In those gaps you may glimpse something extraordinary, the aware space in which thoughts arise, the consciousness that precedes thinking and continues aft. It subsides. The real you, as opposed to the idea of you that the voice is constantly constructing and defending. Ever notice there are brief moments between your thoughts, tiny gaps in the seemingly continuous stream of mental chatter? Most of us rush past these gaps, eager to get to the next thought, like someone channel surfing who can't bear a moment of static between programs. But what if the most important aspect of consciousness isn't the content of our thoughts at all, but these gaps between them? What if in our rush to identify with the voice, we've been overlooking the silent witness that hears the voice? The Indian tradition has a wonderful metaphor. They compare consciousness to the sky and thoughts to clouds passing through it. We've become so fixated on the clouds we've forgotten the sky. But the sky was there before the clouds formed and will be there after they disperse. It's more fundamental, more essential than any cloud. Similarly, your awareness precedes and outlasts any particular thought. It's the container in which all experiences, including thinking, occur. Just as the sky isn't stained by clouds that pass through it, your fundamental awareness isn't altered by the thoughts it witnesses. This silent witness, this pure consciousness, has a remarkable quality. It's impersonal. Now that might sound cold or detached, but it's not. By impersonal, I don't mean unfeeling or uncaring, but rather not limited to what we normally think of as a person, not confined to the biographical details and psychological characteristics the voice identifies as me. This witness doesn't judge, doesn't crave, doesn't fear. It simply observes with clarity and compassion that transcends our usual ego concerns. It's what Buddhists call bare attention, awareness without commentary, seeing without conceptualizing. I'm certainly not suggesting this witness is some little person inside your head watching the show. That would just push the problem back one step. Who'd be watching the watcher? No, what I'm pointing to is consciousness itself, not as a thing, but as the space in which all things appear. Here's an exercise you might try for just a few moments. See if you can rest your attention in the space between thoughts. Don't try silencing your mind, that's just more thinking. Simply notice the brief gaps that naturally occur and linger there in that open spaciousness. What you may discover is this silent presence, this awareness, is actually your most fundamental identity. It's what's left when all the mental constructions of self have been seen through. It's what you are beneath all your ideas about what you are. This isn't some exotic state accessible only to yogis in caves. It's available to everyone, all the time. In fact, it's so close, so intimate, so fundamental that we overlook it like fish who don't notice the water they swim in. The great joke is, we've been searching for enlightenment, for liberation, for our true nature, as if it were some distant achievement, when in fact it's the very consciousness in which the search itself is occurring. It's like someone who goes all over town asking where the town is. Some of you might be thinking, this sounds very mystical and abstract. What practical difference does it make? Let me tell you, it makes all the difference in the world. When you recognize you're not limited to the voice in your head, that your fundamental identity is the awareness in which the voice appears, an extraordinary kind of freedom becomes possible. You're no longer tyrannized by your thoughts, no longer compelled to believe or act on everything the voice tells you. This doesn't mean you stop thinking. It means you hold your thoughts more lightly, with less attachment, less identification. You can use thought when helpful, and set it aside when it's not. You can recognize negative thought patterns for what they are, habitual movements of mind, not statements of truth. In this space between thoughts, you reconnect with the immediacy of direct experience. Colors seem brighter, sounds clearer, sensations more vivid. It's as if a veil has been lifted from perception, a filter removed. Perhaps most importantly, in this silent awareness you discover a peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances or internal states. It's not the peace of having everything go your way or feeling particularly positive emotions. It's the peace of knowing yourself as that which is untouched by the ever-changing play of phenomena, the peace of being the sky, not the clouds.